Yo, you're about to tune into an epic interview with ARK Invest that I recorded on Monday of this week, all about the long-term trajectory of Square Stock, the company's potential to become this digital bank, next generation sort of digital wallet company that I think has so much potential. I actually became a Square shareholder, bought a tiny amount of stock because I'm so into this vision and the potential of what Square is building. But we left out a huge elephant in the room in this interview that I just keep thinking about since we recorded it, which is that Square's business could get cut in half. Revenue could go down 50% or more if this economy shutdown continues. Their customers are small businesses that are now, most of them have been forced to close because of this illness 19. And if this shutdown continues, this is going to have a huge impact on Square's financials, and it could get ugly in the near term. So just think that's super important to remember when you listen to this interview. Anyway, please enjoy. What up, Hyperchange? Welcome to another episode. Today we've got something really exciting lined up. We're going to be talking all about Square with some of the members of the ARK Invest team. Really excited. I just bought Square stock, and ARK Invest. Been following the research on the company for over a year now. I think they're some of the best thought leaders on Square. So joined by two of their analysts today, Max and George. Really thankful for you guys coming on the show. I'm wondering if we could start with you introducing yourself and then maybe giving a little bit of just an overview of what your thoughts are on Square and how you think about their business.
Yeah, thank you. Max Friedrich, covering Square and tech companies at ARK. On the Fintech team together with George. Yeah, I've been also following a little bit of your stuff. I saw you're in the ARK Invest office here and there as well. So thank you for being here.
George, I joined ARK back in August of 2019. Prior to that, spent about 5 years at Square, predominantly working on the small business lending arm, Square Capital.
Awesome. So Max, maybe you could start and just give us a high level of how you think about Square, the company, and their two different business lines of the seller ecosystem and then the Cash App ecosystem.
Sure. So our thinking on Square is basically three parts. It starts with kind of what we think about the merchant side, which is kind of the legacy point of sale hardware business that also includes all the software services. So that's kind of one of the ecosystems. Second one is their consumer ecosystem, the Cash App, where I've been doing a lot of research in recent months. And then the third part of our thesis and what really is unique to Square, I think, is the possibility of merging those two ecosystems, right? So there are not so many companies out there that have direct kind of digital endpoint access to both merchants and consumers. And the merging of those two is a very interesting opportunity as well. And you can also put, things like Square Crypto and what they're doing around Bitcoin and so forth also in that bucket. So that's kind of our thinking.
George, maybe you want to piggyback on that. And I'm curious, maybe a little bit more, if you could dive into what was the opportunity there, like in terms of, digitizing essentially what the ATM and cashier experience is and how you guys think about that opportunity. And then we can get into the Cash App, which I feel like started as like almost a side hustle for the company, but has now seemingly become like just as big of an opportunity.
Yeah, sure. No, I think Max did a good overview, high level overview of the company. I mean, we're particularly interested, on the small business side. It's pretty fascinating to think that, just about 10 years ago, it took about 2 weeks to get access to a credit card processing machine. And Square sort of upended that industry and really moved the goalposts on that industry, allowing people to accept credit cards by simply plugging a credit card reader into their headphone jack. So, I think that's just important context of like where the industry has come from. So, they went from a 2-week approval time down to something like 5 minutes over the course of the last 10 years. And I should note that, prior, in 2008, 2010 timeframe, you used to have as a prospective credit card processor, you used to have to get a hard credit pull. That's no longer needed because Square's done a really good job of sort of, just underwriting prospective merchants. And what that's really enabled is this, these much smaller merchants gaining access to credit card processing. So, if you think about, early 2000s, there was basically no like small coffee shops that would accept credit cards. And now that's possible. So I think that's pretty interesting. And then what they've done a really good job of is just, adding services on top of that, adding software services. And it's not, these aren't revolutionary products, but they are for the small businesses, right? Like, the likes of Walmart and Target have had very sophisticated marketing campaigns. Now Square has brought that to the masses. So they're taking the same playbook of the credit card processing and bringing it downstream to the rest of the business market.
And what excites you the most about the value opportunity for Square there? Is it just processing transactions? I know on their new slide deck they released, they put that as a big sliver. Is it lending to these small businesses? Is it software services on top, like managing payroll or that kind of stuff? Or where do you see the value? Or is it that entire ecosystem coming together like never before, really?
Yeah, I think I really believe in the latter part where they've done such a good job of putting a hook out there for small businesses, and that's the credit card processing. And then, in order to get businesses on, new products, it doesn't actually take that much. So, if I'm a payroll provider today, I'm not even talking about Square, it costs me a lot of money to acquire a new customer, right? Whereas if I'm Square, I already have a huge base of customers that I can sell into. And so their customer acquisition costs are much, much lower. And that's a theme that we see and we've been following, not just on the small business side, but also on the consumer side with the Cash App. It's that customer acquisition cost is so low that it allows them to be much more creative than traditional businesses.
And now we can get a little deeper because this is actually something I really wanted to cover, which is you said you worked in the small business or the lending part of Square, right?
Yep.
Because that's sort of what is the crux of the issue now is a lot of people are concerned like, oh, this whole slowdown with the current economic crisis is going to cause less people to go, which could hurt this sort of loan portfolio of Square. So I'm curious if you could talk about that. And then also the opportunity there, because I see so much like when I think of if you go to a bank and try and get a loan for your business, like that just seems so old school versus, Square looking at all of your data in real time, seeing your transactions, seeing how much you make per day, and then using that and sort of this automated approach to just ping their most, efficient sellers and give them capital when they need it. It just seems like sort of the 2.0 version of small business lending. And I know they do a little bit of, I think it was like 2.4 billion in loans last year. It's not growing like crazy, but I feel like that business alone has huge potential. And given that you worked on it and now with this whole crisis, it's kind of coming to top of mind. I'm curious if you could give us some insight into that piece of Square.
Yeah, it's definitely a pretty interesting time to be talking about Square Capital. Yeah, I would say just taking a step back, one of the common themes, Square Capital had started shortly before I joined the company, but I think what was most interesting was basically that in talking with merchants, we realized that they were having really big issues growing, and a lot of that revolved around getting access to credit. So what Square has done is sort of flip the paradigm in that if you were a small business prior to joining Square, you would have to go to a bank and fill out a paper application. What Square does now is they look at the credit card processing, and based off the credit card processing that they're seeing in real time, they will put an offer in front of these merchants. So it's a proactive outreach saying, hey, you could qualify for up to this amount if you go through this application process based on what we're seeing today. So I think that's a really interesting point. And again, going back to the customer acquisition cost theme, they're already sitting right in front of the customer. They're a trusted entity with these small business partners. So it puts them at a really unique point, in that funnel. I would say, just given recent events around coronavirus, I thought the company actually did a pretty good job alleviating investors' concerns around the loan portfolio. One of the things that they stated, which wasn't as widely known, is that Square sells the majority of the loans off to third-party investors. So they're sharing the risk with these third parties, and the third parties are interested in that they can get access to higher yielding, debt instruments. So I think that's pretty interesting. It remains to be seen, what's going to happen. We're particularly interested in any potential stimulus like flowing through Square directly to businesses, because if we go back to what's the value proposition for Square Capital, it's that businesses can not only apply for a loan, but they can get access to those funds in 1 to 2 business days. Now, if we compare that to traditional lenders, we're talking about a 2-week time frame typically, at best, going through an application process and whatnot. And Max and I have spent the better part of the last couple of weeks talking a lot about this. Is just an unprecedented market drawdown where you see 30% of the value just fall out of nowhere, or not necessarily out of nowhere, but all of a sudden you need to respond with speed. So we spent a lot of time looking at why this opportunity actually makes sense for the federal government. You have something that really affected small businesses in such a short period of time, and that drastically curbed their revenue potential. So you need to respond to a crisis that has happened quickly with speed. And we believe Square, PayPal, other fintech lenders such as Intuit have really good opportunities to actually distribute aid to these small businesses that are desperately in need of short-term working capital.
Yeah, and it's really cool. I read this story about Square wanting to set up or I think it was on their conference call, setting up a website for gift cards that you could purchase for your favorite small businesses, and the way they were forgiving certain loan payments. It really just seemed like they were on the small merchant side, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, it's just another way that they can leverage their network and help people simply help their favorite businesses. And I'd say one of the other themes that we see across Square is that they're just a really agile company. You don't see many companies that are able to spin up a website directory where any consumer can search by zip code or address and simply buy a gift card to support the local businesses that they love. That's a pretty unique offering there.
Yeah. So, Max, maybe I'm curious. I could ask you this. I'm looking at their new Square investor deck, which I'm going to link to because it's so cool. So they say the seller ecosystem in the U.S. is an $85 billion opportunity, 20 million businesses, 6 trillion in receipts, and that results in an 85 billion TAM. So I'm curious, is that I always see Square put these huge numbers, and they say we're 2 to 3% penetrated. So do you realistically think Square is going after all of that? And how do you think about the commoditization of other companies? I think there's one called Clover and sort of these seller replicas of Square. Are those really a threat, or is this just such a big opportunity that there's going to be a couple winners?
I think there is such a big opportunity. On the other hand, big numbers are always better to attract attention, and these presentations get a little bit more interesting. But I really think that is the opportunity out there. And you still see that so many businesses still use those kind of legacy solutions. I think one good line that Square talked about, or rather the management talked about, I think it was in their Q3 2019 call, was that Square has great brand awareness, but not so great product awareness, meaning a lot of merchants know Square the brand, but they don't know actually what Square is able to offer versus what they use or what other providers in the market use. They don't know about the number of software solutions that support kind of this commoditized payment solution. Being the first company to tackle this problem 10 years ago, that does a lot to your DNA as a company. Square started off literally from scratch. They had to build all those products in the merchant as well as in the consumer ecosystem from scratch. They had to solve a problem that led to another problem, to a solution. So they got this kind of intertwined kind of company structure of problem solving and solutions and so forth.
Yeah, it's been pretty incredible to watch Square compound revenue so quickly. I think even in the first 2 months of this year, they said Their seller ecosystem was up 32% in gross profit. And so just to watch them continually grow that has been pretty impressive, especially considering the scale. And now I want to move into Cash App, because this is what I'm totally fascinated on, is this app that I thought was literally just them copying Venmo, and it was just like had no value to it. And then in the past 5 years, according to your research, actually, Max, on Twitter, you said that it was bigger than Venmo. And then I started diving into the financials, and Cash App has been a huge growing piece of Square's gross profit, and becoming a bigger and bigger part of the story. So I'm curious, just at a high level, if you guys could explain, what is Cash App, and why has it gained so much traction?
Sure. So first of all, correction. We put out an estimate of active users for there before both of them published their user base or the user numbers. And it turns out that Venmo actually is still in front of by a somewhat narrow margin. Yeah, Venmo has around 52 million annual active users. Cash App has around 24 million. However, their annual actives that, again, putting it kind of equal to Venmo, probably slightly lower. But all in all, they're huge, financial platforms. Venmo has more annual actives, if you want to compare it to banks, than all the large banks in America, than JP Morgan and so forth. Just to kind of bring that into perspective, these are huge platforms. But as you said, a lot of people think of them as just these, peer-to-peer payment platforms that, have just one use case, which is to send each other, money here and there to your parents and so forth, or friends. What Cash App has done over the years since starting Cash App in 2013 was really evolving from this kind of purely peer-to-peer payment platform into a digital wallet. And that term really originated in China, where you have WeChat Pay and Alipay, for those who know those applications, which really serve as an application on your mobile phone to do, to access multiple financial products, but also commercial products. So, for example, on WeChat Pay, you can pay your friends and family. You can also pay at stores. You can invest in stocks. You can order, meal delivery. You have access to e-commerce, and all these different functionalities basically in one application. And in China, WeChat Pay and 90% of the digital wallet market, and in dollar terms, the amount of transactions that happen on these platforms last year were $36 trillion. That's nearly 3x the Chinese GDP. So this is a big deal. So now the question is, will this be replicated around the world in the same manner? Maybe not in the same manner, because of all different kind of reasons, cultural reasons, payment infrastructure and so forth. But generally, we see the transition kind of all around the world, in the US, including the US, for the consumer financial life onto your mobile phone. And the Cash App really has been, at the forefront of that development in the US, where they developed their peer-to-peer payments platform into this digital wallet that now offers, also Bitcoin investing, equity investing. They have the Cash Card, which is their debit card, which you can use, online or in store for payments. And tied to that, they have a rewards program called Boost, which offers personalized boosts or rewards, at certain retailers and so forth. So they've been able to build this, from a probably, money losing, potentially still is very likely right now because they're investing a lot, but not as much as in the past, venture to, a part of the business that, if you exclude Bitcoin revenue, contributes between, a fifth to a fourth of their overall revenue, which is very powerful.
Yeah, it's been a huge, there's one chart in their slide that shows how much of the gross profit it has been, and it's really it served to accelerate the gross profit growth of Square. And I'm curious, maybe George, you could chime in on this. The product innovation, the cadence of these new features, like you're saying, stock investing, crypto, that's what's really blown me away of the Cash App is the pace of innovation and just the execution. So I'm curious, who's like the secret sauce? What's the team behind Cash App? And how have they just executed so unbelievably quickly here?
Yeah, I mean, I think just from a high level perspective, there's not any one secret, but I would say what Max was alluding to earlier around the DNA. I think that's really really important. So Jack has been an ardent supporter of Cash App since its inception. Brian Grassadonia currently leads the team. He was actually Square's first product manager. And I think one of the things from my perspective that they've done a really good job on is just really creating teams that have goals. So there's they've talked about this in the past, but they've got a stock trading team that solely works on that. They've got a Bitcoin team. And then they've also got Square Crypto. So I think they've just done a really, really good job of creating an entrepreneurial environment and making sure that each team has the resources that they need to succeed. Now, not everything's going to succeed, but they've done a pretty good job of both understanding, really what the jobs are that need to be done. And that's, taking a little bit from Clayton Christensen, the former Harvard Business School professor, and really, taking that philosophy and applying it to this business setting. So really understanding what the customer needs. And Max has done a really, really good job of looking at, the consumer financial space, and really, last spring published a lot of really good research around, the applicability of the Cash App, or rather the usage of Cash App geographically overlaid onto the FDIC's unbanked and underbanked map, which is really, really interesting, which everybody should take a look at, where it just basically shows, there's a vast majority, or there's a large population of the US that doesn't have access to, traditional financial products that you or I might have access to. And that could be for any one number of reasons, but traditionally what it's seen as being is really just, the financial products that exist are disadvantaged or disadvantage those with less money. So, an overdraft fee, for instance, is how banks have made up a lot of revenue, post financial crisis. So that has like a lot of implications for someone that doesn't have as much money. Whereas, if I have $100 in my bank account and I get an overdraft fee and it's for $20, that's 20%. Whereas if I have, $1,000 in my bank account, it's not as big of a deal, right? So it's really just understanding what the customer needs are and then building products around that to support these customers, which then create this, viral effect of, hey, this product's really useful. I should use it. My friends should use it, so on and so forth. So I think that's to me what I've seen as Cash App's, secret sauce. But also, again, just going back to, clear support from the top of the company down through that entire team.
So this is a noob question, but Cash App makes money in three ways: spending, sending, and investing. And they say they're making like $30 a user, but when I use Cash App, I'm not spending any money. It's free to trade Bitcoin, free to buy a tiny piece of a stock, free to send money. So maybe you could just break down, like, really simply, how is Cash App actually making money? 458 million in gross profit is huge. This is a huge business, but as a consumer, I'm not paying any money.
I'll take the Bitcoin side. On Bitcoin, they actually are charging a fee now. They used to not charge a fee. But okay. I think this past fall, they charge a nominal, like it's tiered based on how much you're actually buying. But Max, correct me if I'm wrong, it's right around like 1.6 or 7%. So somewhere right in that neighborhood. And then, if you're spending money using Cash App, Max brought up the debit card, right? So they'll collect interchange fee from that. And then, in terms of it, I was actually going to mention this earlier. It's really interesting seeing the evolution of the products and how they monetize them, right? So exactly what they're doing on the on the commercial side, which is creating like really sticky products. They're doing the same thing on the consumer side, and then only once they've seen some sort of call it terminal usage, then they'll turn on the monetization scheme because it's a product that's more fully fledged. So they'll roll a product out, and it might not be as as sticky. So for instance, with Bitcoin, they allowed you to buy Bitcoin, but then you couldn't really do anything. It was just sort of in that wallet. Now they allow you to withdraw the Bitcoin and so on and so forth. So it's really a matter of just getting a minimal viable product out into market, and then seeing what the adoption of that product is like, and then figuring out ways to monetize it afterwards.
And I'm curious if you guys could put a valuation on Cash App, or how you think about this, because I did a video recently where I valued them around 10 to 15 billion. And the more I looked into their business lines, I was like, wow, this is really, like you said, a digital wallet of the future. Robinhood is worth 5 billion and they do stock trading. Cash App just launched that. They're just doing crypto with Bitcoin. They're competing with Coinbase now. That you can send payments to the UK. That's TransferWise. Venmo is worth a couple $2 billion just peer-to-peer payments. Like, they're literally like, I see them taking market share and in theory market cap from $4 billion financial services at once, and it feels like they're just becoming quietly this stealthy like digital wallet, or aka like new digital bank for consumers. And I feel like this is a huge opportunity. So I'm curious, how do you think about valuing something like this that is such a new business model and also so early in its growth and product life cycle?
Sure. So I think it's we believe that the Cash App is still undervalued. You see from the investment community that they're starting more and more to look into it, as it obviously also becomes a larger share. It's hard to put one number on that. And if we had that, I don't know if we necessarily would share it. One way to kind of think about it is to compare it to what some of the private fintech companies that you mentioned, what they do and what they are valued at, and to actually the banks, if you look at it from a per user perspective. A sample of the largest banks in America, and you look at how many active accounts they have, and you look at how much revenue they make in their consumer banking part of the business, right? They have a lot of parts of the business, but just look at the consumer banking part of the business of these banks, and how many customers they have. You can do some math and find out that in terms of market cap, investors are paying between $3,000 and $4,000 per active. That's kind of what the bank customer is worth at maturity, and that includes several different things that people do at banks. They put their deposit there, they get a credit, they get a mortgage, all across different products. Then you can look at the valuations of fintechs. Take all these challenger banks, Chime here in the US, Viral Money in the US. You also have some European players like Revolut, N26, the Robinhoods of this world. If you look at the valuation tags on these businesses and how many customers they have, you'll see that venture capitalists are paying between $1,000 and $3,000 per user in valuation in these funding rounds, which is actually quite a lot of money if you compare it to what the bank customers were. The delta isn't that big. You could argue that these private fintechs, they don't rely on a branch infrastructure and all these employees, so their margins might be better. That would maybe justify that higher valuation, because you can go higher as well at some point. So compared to those two categories, you can look at the Cash App, and just based on Square's financials across the company, if you take the price to sales multiple across whole Square, and do the math again in terms of what market cap investors are paying for one active Cash App user, that number actually is around between $100 and $200. is a lot less. Now, probably investors are valuing Cash App at a little premium, to the kind of legacy Square company, right? You could argue that investors are valuing different parts of Square at a different multiple. But just kind of leaving that aside, because like I said, a lot of the investor community still hasn't kind of caught on what Cash App is doing. It's still fair to say that Cash App likely is valued at a huge discount to both private unicorns as well as the big banks. And that is kind of the opportunity that I was talking about earlier in terms of evolving this peer-to-peer payment platform, to this digital wallet, to this really banking platform. If you read the Cash App job postings, they're talking about themselves as a global banking platform. They want to grow into that. And, you can do the math, on Square as a whole or on Cash App as a whole. If these millions, now there are 24 million active, monthly active Cash App users, if they were not valued at $100 or $200, but rather at 1,000 or 2,000 or maybe 4,000 or 5,000, Square's market cap looks completely different. And the challenge, from our perspective for Cash App really is to, educate investors about the potential of this kind of user valuation transformation, but then obviously also get more and more people to use the different products, to create that revenue that would, kind of sustain that, or allow for that kind of valuation. And also, George alluded to this, also potentially move up from the underbanked, unbanked community to a more kind of financially sound user base. Because, that's where, more cash can be generated off every customer. If you're, spending more, if you're investing more and so forth, obviously, with a fee-based model, that's an important issue as well. And in our work, looking, you can't really look into the company, how they're doing that transition from the kind of unbanked, underbanked to more, financially sound, maybe Venmo-like user base, have this college user base and so forth. Can't really look into it directly because obviously they don't share that data. But what you can look at is Google Trends and kind of how Google searches for the Cash App evolve over time. And there we see that the areas with the highest growth in terms of, new areas where people are searching for the Cash App online is actually coming from these non-southern US states. So like George said, southern US states, you have a lot of concentration of unbanked and underbanked communities. Cash App is really strong there right now. But at least in Google Trends, you see them moving into other geographies where you would expect a little bit, higher educated, higher median income population and so forth. So that really is the challenge there. But if they can do it, it's a huge value unlock and great from a valuation perspective.
Just to add on there, I think like one of the more unique things about Cash App is their marketing strategy, and just like two examples to contextualize how they actually engage with their customers on an ongoing basis, but also acquire customers. One, it's particularly interesting, given the crisis that the U.S. is in. It's great to see a company reaching out to its customers on all forms of social media. So one of the products or features, I should say, that Cash App has is the cash tag. So when you sign up, you can have a cash tag, and Cash App will actually have these rewards programs or Cash App Fridays on Twitter. And actually send money directly to users. And so they not only have a Cash App Friday, but they also have, they just post your cash tag. And so Square is actually giving out aid to those that are in need. So I think that's absolutely amazing from a financial institution perspective. We've never seen, a financial institution that engages with consumers on social media. So that's one interesting part. And then the other interesting part, which is sort of what Max was getting at, which is around trying to go up market and trying to penetrate new demographics. 2 weeks ago we saw they hosted a tournament on Twitch, with gamers such as Ninja, 100 Thieves, and whatnot. And I think it was like $100,000 tournament that they hosted. And so, you're seeing them like penetrate a totally different, form of social media, but then also a completely new demographic, what we think is a new demographic. So I think that's just a really interesting thing that where we are very impressed with the company on that.
Yeah.
It's funny.
And just Gali,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's such an important point to make. So just to add to that, kind of from a high level perspective, in their investor deck, that they big total addressable market number for, and what that just means is that the opportunity is huge. There are a lot of you can acquire, but there are also a lot of companies obviously going for. So two of the main challenges are acquiring those customers in that huge market, but then also retaining them, right? Kind of keeping them from churning off to the next cool. What they're doing with these really marketing campaigns that George has talked about, be it on Instagram, on Twitter, is they're inserting their application with these into these different communities and kind of let them spread, which is really beneficial for them also from a customer acquisition because as one user of this network, your value of the Cash App increases as a function of the overall number of people on there, right? It only makes sense if all your peers and friends and family are also on there. Every user is actually motivated to also sign up others in their community, which is a super fascinating effect. And where they have what we think is a clear competitive advantage over other standalone fintech apps where you don't have that. And you can even add on top of that and say that peer-to-peer networks, this effect is stronger than for social media, where you also had that. It's the same. It also only makes sense if your friends are on Instagram as well. But the effects could be even stronger on payment network. Incentive to bring on maybe your parents, your grandparents actually also there, whereas you don't necessarily want your parents following your Instagram stories, about your last party or something. So these effects could actually be stronger, with Cash App and Venmo. And that, and combining, that onboarding with multiple products, like investing, like Bitcoin investing, is basically creating the situation where the users are invested in your product. They're tied to to a number of products. If you're now if you have established the Cash App or Venmo as the default payment option between you and your friends, it's very hard for you to just leave that network. Because now if you're at dinner and you want to split the bill and you're the only one not having, the whole thing turns into a kind of an uncomfortable social situation where you're in debt to somebody, right? It's not like you just deleted this random fintech app from your phone. This is actually a kind of a stress situation for you because you can't pay your friends back. And these effects, could be much stronger than what, a private fintech unicorn, however millions of dollars of funding they got. It's really hard for them to recreate those effects.
Yeah, the viralness of Cash App's marketing, I feel like their marketer deserves some award. Like they went viral on TikTok with all these like hashtags. And then you mentioned 100 Thieves. Didn't they partner on some sort of store or esports location? Do either of you guys know about that?
So they had a partnership with 100 Thieves. They actually started last May 2019. They signed the first partnership with them. And then in January this year, they put together the 100 Thieves X Cash App compound, which is I think one of the first kind of multi-functionality kind of compounds for esports teams. So, game departments of 100 Thieves can train there. They also have, media rooms to record content. They can also show their merch. It's really a kind of holistic approach.
Yeah, it's so cool. So I'm going to give you guys a little rant to set you up for the last question, which is my theory of why I'm so excited about Square and this opportunity is I see the convergence of these two ecosystems. And I think there's a third storyline I want to tie into that, which is a couple years ago, Square obviously launched their crypto solution. But in the background, we've seen Jack Dorsey been buying a ton of Bitcoin, be a huge proponent of Bitcoin, say it should be the internet's backbone currency. He's also an angel investor in a company called Lightning Labs, which is building layer 2 solutions for the Bitcoin network. And it seems like we're setting up for this holy grail sort of convergence of Cash App, Square seller ecosystem, and then using Bitcoin layer 2 as the technology to connect all these customers with all these businesses. And if you look at Square's opportunity slide, they have a $39 billion opportunity in transactions. And to me, which is their biggest one for their seller side, and to me, that's all coming up with a new payment technology to facilitate those transactions. So I'm curious, how you guys think about this, but to me, that's why I'm invested in it. And to me, that's the 10x, 10 bagger scenario here is that Square pulls this off and they're able to, charge less per transactions, but get a higher margin and then connect these two ecosystems with, tens of millions of people, become this sort of new era bank. And they're also simultaneously taking, Bitcoin and crypto mainstream at the same time. I'm also long Bitcoin, but I just think this is such an interesting sort of slow motion, weaving together of the next wave of the whole financial system.
Yeah, I can start with that. I definitely agree with you and sort of the merging of the two ecosystems being a compelling investment opportunity. That's one of our thesis, and it's why we're pretty interested in Square. I would say that from what we can tell, just reading through transcripts, listening to their management talk, Amrita, who's their CFO, was at an investor conference last fall and basically alluded to one way in which you'd start to see the two ecosystems come together was through a loyalty product. So if you think about Square's loyalty solution today, it's basically for businesses to attract and drive new customers. But what if those loyalty solutions were potentially put in the Cash App in some way? So Amrita said that. So I think you'll start to see from our thinking, we're sort of the opinion that you're going to start to see a slow piecing of the two ecosystems together. It remains to be seen, what could come, what will actually come first. But it makes a lot of sense if I have 7 stars at a coffee shop, and a coffee shop is trying to get more traffic, then they could just send me a push notification or something like that, and it could potentially pop up in the Cash App as a way to bring me back into the store. So that makes a ton of sense. That makes a ton of sense to us.
Yeah, and just to add to that, at ARK we have a dedicated crypto analyst. You've seen, we've been looking into crypto since the inception of the firm in 2014. Released a Bitcoin white paper in 2015. And you could talk about a lot of interesting things in the context of Square and crypto, and also Square Crypto, which is their kind of designated arm of the company, which is I don't even know if I want to say arm of the company, because I think the very interesting thing about them is taking this kind of open approach, an open source approach. There are a few Medium blog posts kind of talking about the vision behind Square Crypto, and one of the opening lines is, why design the future of a company if you can design the future of money. I think that sums up, their approach to this whole venture of, the future of Bitcoin, basically. So I think they also are kind of in the long crypto, long Bitcoin especially game, and they just, I think, I'm not that deep in the crypto world, but I think what you've seen over recent years is that companies who try to kind of align themselves too closely with Bitcoin, or kind of go on a little bit too edgy marketing campaigns and so forth, not really earning the trust of the real Bitcoin community that was there for, over 10 years now. And Square is, really playing this long game of being open source and really kind of pushing this holistic development of the whole space. And I think then at some point, you can kind of earn what you've built over the years, and insert yourself in more detail in transaction flows or whatnot. I think they're very deliberate in this approach. I think it's a very great approach, and if you're thinking about it from a valuation perspective, I think that like I said, a lot of investors probably are still not appreciating the full potential of Cash App. I think really the majority is not thinking about these things we're just talking about. And that's obviously very fascinating too. You can kind of get a sneak peek into what they might do if you look at some of their patents. I don't know if you've done that, Gali, but that's really fascinating. So you can kind of think about that, but obviously you also have to know that patents are not that reliable. They just want to kind of put everything out there, and who knows with what they're going to follow up. But it's like you said, very, very fascinating what they're doing on that. And just one last point also about the company DNA. The Cash App already has, like George said, maybe a little bit different DNA than the overall Square team. But then the Square Crypto team, a little bit different as well, very passionate. In time having that, top down, obviously from Jack Dorsey. If you look at his Twitter bio, I think you know how much he likes this space. So yeah.
So you actually just made me think of something, Max. How big of there is an opportunity as we have more transactions in the seller ecosystem crossing with the Cash App ecosystem, this gift card thing, for Square to almost have like their own sort of virtual points or currency that trades around within their ecosystem that's sort of off chain of the main financial system where they're paying these huge fees. Is that something that you guys have explored or thought of?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the holy grail of this whole thing, is to potentially create this closed loop payments network, and kind of cut out a lot of the intermediaries that are in the flow of a transaction, how it's happening today. As you also have alluded to, kind of in your question before, then you can probably think about whole different margins and things like this you can do. I think that's also what they're shooting for. I think that's what you hear when you listen to their conference calls. I think Jack really tries to push this narrative and kind of wants to educate on the uniqueness that Square possesses in terms of having the merchants and the consumers, and potentially merging to in practicality. Obviously this is a little bit more difficult than just saying, oh yeah, they're just going to merge these two, right? It's obviously going to require a lot of effort, but like we discussed before on the podcast, I think if there's one company that could fulfill this, Square is definitely one of them. They also have to work a little bit. This again goes to what George said earlier and what I talked about, kind of moving a little bit up the funnel in the Cash App, because if you look at it, the kind of on a geographical basis, the users of the Cash App and the merchants on the Square side are actually not that aligned. You have Square in a lot of coffee shops in New York and San Francisco and so forth. And right now you still have a lot of Cash App usage concentration in the southern US states. So there's a little bit of a mismatch, but that could also turn into maybe an advantage because you can incentivize, the maybe merchants to open there because you can say you have a lot of Cash App users or something. So, but there's still a couple of problems to solve. But again, I think the big vision and Jack Dorsey really wants to push that on investors as well.
Callie, one other point that I just wanted to make on sort of like the potential of this potential merging of the two ecosystems, and sort of like one proxy that really piques our interest, or a past example of Square innovating is, I think it was in 2017, Square reduced the time to process a chip card transaction from 4.2 seconds to 2 seconds. Now, that's interesting in and of itself, but what's more interesting to us is they did so retroactively through a software update. So, if you think about their payment terminals today, which are software enabled and are constantly receiving software updates, it's not that big of a stretch to say, hey, like, a merchant could opt in to, accept some sort of, digital payment. We're not sure what that is, but the simple fact that is there and that ability is there, gives us, some optimism on that thesis.
That also is there with Tesla, right? Yeah. So it's actually really interesting, the verticalization that Square has, that a company like Apple has, a company like Tesla has, could really help them in the long run.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you both so much
Thanks.
for joining. Really, really appreciate it. And I'll definitely link to some of your research. I'm a huge fan of the way you guys put out your research publicly. I just think that does so much for the investing community, and the Hyperchange community really appreciates it. So thank you, George and Max. This was so fun talking Square. I hope we can catch up about it soon, see how some of these theories played out. But yeah, thanks for taking the time to join.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.